thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
Thank you for, as far as I can tell, you're the most transparent of our representatives. So
thank you.
It's very, very, you're doing your job.
Fair enough.
To be able to have, some kind of access to you to where you can communicate what's going on in Tallahassee to normal people, and it not just feel like our guys are up there doing who knows what. Mm-hmm. So thank you for being here.
And first, let me extend an invitation. Anytime that either you or one of your listeners is in Tallahassee, please, make sure they stop by. We're actually in the Capitol, so it's 319 Capitol, and we actually have a little room there that's between our two offices that folks can congregate in, or we have some snacks up there for people as they go around the Capitol, and then also just a place to kind of to leave their coats or whatever else if they're coming up during this session, which, unlike Stewart, it's probably going to be cold. So we start January 9th and we run through about the second week of March, and we'll be rolling through sessions. So again, we'll extend the invitation and anytime.
How does that work with you? Do you live up there part-time, or are you coming back and forth?
So I go back and forth, and there are times when I'm up there for a full weekend like this. The first week I'll be up there for basically 2 weeks solid, and I have a house up there with
Nice.
3 other legislators, and we all share the costs and everything else with that. And the Florida House does give us a small stipend for housing during session. Otherwise, we're paying for it out of our salary or our pockets, that kind of thing. So
I have always been curious about that, how that worked. It seemed like that was a pretty big burden if you had to keep going back and forth to Tally.
We do. The state does give us some travel money, and that allows us to pay for gas and tolls and things like that. Occasionally, I'll do a flight up there. It's normally about 5.5 hours one way to drive up. And most people say, wait a minute, that seems really fast. Well, we average probably about 80 miles an hour, hopefully. But on the way back, many times it's turned into an 8-hour drive. And so you kind of time it, and hopefully it's not going to be that long. But that's also prompted me to fly a couple times recently. So
you're going to get your pilot's license?
Oh, I'd love to. That'd be fantastic. But then, then it's all the other stuff. But yeah.
But you got a pilot buddy now?
No, not at all. It's Delta's my friend. Yes.
Delta's your pilot buddy.
But unfortunately, I have to go through Atlanta in order to get there. There's no nonstop unless I drive to Miami. So why would you drive, though, 2 hours south to then fly 2 hours north?
Right.
So,
yeah, man, we got to get you a pilot friend.
There you go.
So what's brewing in this legislative session? Mm-hmm. I saw from Gil's article 789 is one that you're sponsoring. Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense of characterizing what the overall tone is for this session, or does it kind of obviously evolve as we get in it?
You'll know more on day one, if you will, for session, because we'll have the state of the state address by the governor. We'll also have some addresses by the House Speaker as to kind of what his priorities are. He's been very close to the vest, other than we'll probably do some additional tort reform that we did. Last year was the first time in over almost 25 years where there was substantial tort reform, and that was really to address a lot of the insurance issues and the things that are happening with homeowner insurance, with condo
What do you
insurance.
see as the future of that? Because that's a big issue for people, right?
Sure.
I'm sure you know.
I mean, I think we're going to continue to have a change in tort reform will be one thing. We'll continue to have some ways that we can expand the market as well and get more competition in here. So one of the things that drove up costs was all of the companies leaving. And as a result, the companies that were left over had a market where they could pretty much dictate what they wanted to spend. Now, we also need to remember, folks are like, my gosh, my insurance went way up. One thing that a lot of people don't look at is what's the value of your home now compared to even 5 years ago? What is the cost of rebuilding that home? Materials, labor, et cetera. All that has skyrocketed. So that a bit of that is reflected in your insurance rates. Now, I don't see why we're doubling insurance rates and bringing that forward. We constantly have other things that we've been doing as well, such as we've increased our sustainability laws. So in other words, we're looking hard at What's going on in the coastal areas? Are we in fact hardening our coastal areas better? Are we looking at where homes and structures are built? So all of those things are part of an overall approach that looks at not only the lawsuit side of it, not only the finance side where we're backing with reinsurance and putting state dollars to that, but we're also looking now at the actual environment and saying, all right, how can we make Florida, quote unquote, more storm hardened? Mm-hmm. Then we also had a program. It was My Safe Florida Home.
Yes.
So this was a program that I really was pushing for a lot of folks that don't know about it. It's called My Safe Florida Home, and it's if you Google that, it'll bring you to a page where you can get a free home inspection from the state. Mm-hmm. It's not something that you automatically submit to your insurance company. You can if you want to, but it basically gives you a summary of, hey, is your home in good shape? Are there things we can do? Exactly. Yep. So and I hadn't had that done. I just recently did it, and they ran through and did a whole inspection, and I found out some ways that I can improve my home. Mm-hmm. So we'll certainly be working on that over the next little bit.
And it's not necessarily going to kick up your insurance if they find those weak spots. It's just so that you can get reimbursed.
It will not be reported to the insurance at all. And you can choose what to do with that report. And it may, in fact, lower your insurance if the report comes back and says, gosh, you've done this and this and this and this, and then you can submit that to the insurance company. So, but it's completely up to you what you want to do with that report.
And from a financial side, this is my understanding of it, is they'll pay up to $10,000, 2 to 1. So you'd be on the hook for like $5,000 and they pay $10,000. And
so they'll give you a $10,000 grant. Right. If your home appraises at $700,000 or less.
Got it.
So anybody above that, you're not going to be getting the $10,000 grant, mm-hmm. but you still qualify for the free inspection. So our home doesn't qualify for that type of the $10,000, but we did go through with a free inspection.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I guess talking about 789 mm-hmm. would be a good place to kind of land. Is what was the impetus? This is your bill. Mm-hmm. Yep. 789 is your bill. It's been characterized maybe some different ways. I wanted to hear, from you what the impetus behind it, what it is. It's because there's different components of it.
Right.
Right. It's not just like one thing. It's sort of a holistic approach, right? But what it is, why it's necessary, the additions, and
sure,
mostly.
We looked at a variety of things that are out there right now. Worked with a fair amount of constituents. Work with the agencies as well, and we're looking at overall. We would refer to this as kind of an omnibus bill. So it has a variety of different mm-hmm. items within it. And my first stop will be the water
Which
quality.
Isn't popular to say, right? Omnibus.
Train bills are not good because train bills, it's just all kinds of stuff thrown in there. I would not say that this is a train bill, but there's certainly different topics within it.
Right.
There's a lot of what I would look at as environmental tort reform, and that's one of the things that I think is probably going to be the single biggest item that folks are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're doing this. So to touch on that topic specifically,
yes.
If somebody was to put in a lawsuit that was found to be either A, frivolous, or B, was quote unquote defeated, if you will, by the prevailing side, the prevailing mm-hmm. side would get the legal fees associated with it. Now, we're getting...
What is the issue that made that necessary? Why?
We're seeing that, number one, permits were being held up, if you will. And so that a person would go through the permit process, which is public notices, and there are a variety of opportunities for the public to be involved in that. There's even a 30-day window that goes between the permit time being put out there and then it actually being in a challenge period. If somebody challenges during that time frame, you're fine. But after that, that's where the provisions then kick in. Additionally, if somebody says, "Look, I'm going to sue this for a reason that is not even in the permit whatsoever," that would be deemed frivolous, and therefore you would see, even though it would hold up, quote unquote, the permit going forward, now you face that consequence of a prevailing party actually recouping their losses associated with that. So the public has a huge amount of time that they have to be able to respond and to actually have input on these permits. And the agencies are not, saying, look, we're doing this in the dark. We're not allowing anybody to comment on this. So it's wide open. And any permit that's typically going to be challenged and or have controversy, there's a lot of folks that are looking at it. And there's a lot of folks that have eyes on that as it goes through the process. And that's why you have the public websites of e-permitting. And you can look at every single letter, email, stuff that's being put in so that it's wide open and in the public.
There was one, I won't pull up the exact page, but it was an addition that included being real or personal property. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about?
So
where before it seemed more open-ended, like somebody could challenge.
It's an ownership issue, so a lot of times what people will do is on a permit specifically, you may own the property, and I said, Chris, I'm going to buy that property, but as I buy it, I'm going to go through a due diligence phase, and until I get my permit, I'm not going to sign off in the final, if you will, check to you. Mm-hmm. So that's where the real and personal comes into play. And so,
and I'm not a lawyer, so real does my sort of background, my thought of understanding this, and you can correct me, is real does imply use or ownership, right? Like you.
Well, it's also corporate.
Okay.
So you could say, this business is real or is it personal?
Yep.
So right, that kind of thing.
So does that exclude, somebody who's not necessarily next door or has direct impact from this development from being involved in challenging?
Not at all.
Okay.
No, a person could certainly show that they have cause by that they're going to be impacted by this. And so a lot of times also
secondarily somehow.
Sure. I mean, you have to remember the permits that we're talking about are primarily like wetland impact permits or large roadway permits or things along those lines. So those have a long history of public input. And additionally, if there's a local wetland impact permit, a lot of times the public knows about it and there's some kind of a development that's going along with it as well at the same time. So that's where, again, the public can be involved locally. And we found that, locally is typically the best time for people to be involved for larger developments.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it's going to come down to who sits on your commissions, right?
Absolutely, sure.
So, but
and to go with that,
yes.
I could get a permit to do X, Y, or Z, but I may not get the land approvals to do X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. So that's where those two things kind of go back and forth and work together.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if hesitation is the right word, but I try to always weigh it all out. Mm-hmm. Everything that's happening to the best of my understanding of what's happening is. Right. We hit on insurance a little bit, right? So part of those insurance rates going up is, in my mind, there's so much development happening, right? The more humans, infrastructure you put into Florida, there's going to be more liability when the hurricane comes, right? More gets destroyed. There's more, with less and less companies that are going to cover it, and more expensive, more and more stuff, that there's going to be more money and more liability, right? So my thought process is if you have, now sort of the time to be pickier than ever with the environmental side of it in terms of making sure that the drainage makes sense, making sure that, all of that stuff truly does make sense. So
let me unpack that a little bit.
Yes, sir. Yep.
So number one,
all right, we're back. Technical difficulties. So please follow that train of thought.
So to unpack that a little bit, we were talking about a variety of different things, and if you look at the amount of people that are coming here, and we've actually had an increase in the amount of insurance companies now that are here. Okay. So the market has expanded, and therefore people are trying to take advantage of the market by saying, "All right, I'm gonna coming in here to do this. I'm coming in here to do that." And after hurricane season was over, we saw I think it was 4 new companies come in, and there's additional 4 or 5, according to Jimmy Petronas, that are coming online. I believe it was yesterday on the 1st. So they're starting a whole new year with additional companies now. We also did a provision where folks have to roll off of the state-sponsored insurance and onto these private companies. If you're within 20% of the state-sponsored in a quote, then you are required to roll off to the other company. What that does is that increases, again, competition out there. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing overall rates are either becoming stabilized or going down. Now, I guarantee you that somebody who's listening to this says, my rates didn't at all. Mine went up again. I'm sorry. We're doing everything we can to do that. Now, we're also looking at, one of the things that 789 does as well, when I say it's a comprehensive bill, we're now looking at how all of our sustainability items that we've talked about recently are now coming into play. And is the coastal construction control line actually where it's supposed to be?
Give me some specifics for people who have no idea what you're talking about. Like what are these?
Sure. So Bathtub Beach house that was built on the point out there.
Exactly.
Okay. That was built utilizing an older coastal construction control line. And we're seeing the erosion come in, undermine that house, and it was almost immediate. And so was that a good permit to give as part of the coastal construction control line permitting that DEP does? And I think there's a lot of people would argue that no, it wasn't. There's other folks that would say, well, look, that was a private lot, private land. The person who built that house took that risk on their own. So then, is it insured? And if it is insured, what's the insurance on that? So those are all things that come into play. Mm-hmm. And then what we're doing with 789 also is looking and saying, all right, where are the highest areas of risk? Where are the highest areas that we may want to have go in and deal with either dune restoration, maybe some offshore breaks, things that we might be able to do to help with what's been constructed onshore. The Army Corps in their inevitable wisdom, one of the things that they wanted to do for Miami and looking at potential sea level rise and different things that happen in those areas, they just wanted to build a wall, literally around like all of Miami. Mm-hmm. And that's not a good solution in my opinion. So then you get a system of levees, you get a system where all of a sudden you have a levee break and you've got a Katrina New Orleans right. Thing again. So we're looking at it in different ways, and that's another part of this bill that really looks at, all right, what is the comprehensive solution rather than a microcosm?
And are you working with insurance companies to try to hammer that out, like what you guys can do on your end and how that could ultimately bring down the costs?
So personally, I'm not working with insurance companies per mm-hmm. se. They are part of what happens in the house. People come and talk to us and say, "Hey, this is what's happening here. This is what's happening there."
So you kind of put it out there, and then they're coming in with their feedback, and that's mm-hmm. what helps shape it.
And part of that also in our tort reform issues. Another portion of this same bill, we're looking at side slopes, and we're looking at the 4-to-1 side slope or something steeper. And what prompted that was the DEP is the overall permitting agency for environmental stuff within the state of Florida. They then delegate permitting authority to the water management districts. And so you have all those agencies, but across those agencies, you could build a lake with a 3-to-1 side slope or a 2-to-1 side slope or a 4-to-1, and it was all over the place. So mm-hmm. what this bill does is it standardizes that across all of the various water management districts and agencies. The reason that we're doing this also is that some industrious attorneys were basically saying that, well, this particular side slope wasn't built to code or to permit, and therefore, a person drowned, and so we're suing either the landowner, the developer, the guy who cut the lake. It goes across the board. So now, by doing this, we're removing, we're removing that element from again where somebody could be sued. Mm-hmm. So again, we're looking at ways that we can do tort reform because, before what we did last year, Florida was known as a hellhole for overall litigation. It was a litigation hellhole, and it qualified on this whole list and whatever else. Well,
in what context?
So we had over 80%, it was 79% of all insurance lawsuits nationally happened in the state of Florida. So all these claims and everything else, 79% were happening here within the state of Florida.
Is this like around roofs or?
It was
what is
everything.
Okay.
I mean, literally, slip and falls. It was a variety of medical issues, car accidents, etc. People suing. I mean, you name it. So all of these things were happening prior to last year when we made some provisions. Now, somebody can still sue.
What percentage of those are in Hialeah?
But I'll just go right over that one.
Yeah.
Honestly, there's a whole variety of suits that we were looking at and dealing with. And to give you an idea, the 4 days between the time that it went from passage on the floor to when the governor signed it, so it was there were 70,000 lawsuits that were filed statewide just in Martin County alone. The lawsuits jumped up by like 700% just in that 4-day window. And what that was is people wanted to make sure that they got their lawsuits in prior to our new laws taking effect.
Got it.
So now one of the other reasons why insurance hasn't gone down as much, all of those 70,000 lawsuits, plus the other ones that were already working their way through, all of them have to get through the system. And then we're going to see the insurance companies not having to pay out as much as a result.
And so that's the idea with tort reform is filtering that down to where there's less and less.
That's a big portion of it, yes. And
costs.
so this bill is also addressing that. And overall, like I said, it's more of an environmental tort reform. So,
what else is in 789? That's
you've hit on the main high points of it. Yep. So we're looking at whether it be permit challenges, side slopes. We're looking at an overall review of all of the agencies and how that's going with sustainability. So, a lot of those things are all within it. So,
in my experience so far, on the outside and on the inside, I won't necessarily be specific to City of Stewart, but just paying more attention than I have in the past. It does seem like municipalities can function as, machines that help just get things approved. And sometimes there is human error in that process, and you can be left with, a project. I'll be very specific. So across the street from me, forever that was an empty lot here on the river. Nice rocky lot, one big tree, beautiful, sailboats would go by. It was heaven. And then they built this very large structure. And I remember when that was going in, I was like, wait, they're bringing the grade up. What are they doing? Oh, they're putting a garage under it. Okay. How's that I hope I don't flood, I hope that doesn't change, because this is a little old house, it's the original grade. Everything's higher than me. But I notice now when you get those heavier rains, now I have to sandbag up the back, because even though they have the grates, and I'm sure there's baffle boxes and all the things that in our human wisdom we engineered in, and we made them do, the nature finds a way element that you can't predict, water ends up sheeting down
to the lowest point.
Right. So I do see the environmental, and I don't like environmentalists, but like conservationists and people who are thinking about, holistically how Florida's developing. I see that side as well, right? Like, how do we balance and not put undue hardship on your developer, on the person who has property rights and should be able to do with their land what they do, as long as it's appropriate, it's within the comp plan, or it gets approvals. But also the even if it's not the person right across the street,
right,
what are the mechanisms to not bog down the system and cause rates to go up, and that's what you're trying to juggle. But how does the average human also have a say in that process, when it sometimes can feel like the system is just set up to get the development through, and maybe the average person doesn't really have a say. I know that's pretty open-ended, but
I would say the average person does have a say.
Okay.
And the average person does have that by, number one, there's a reason you ran for city council.
Right.
There is a reason that, people supported you because you had a similar vision to many folks that were in the city. Mm-hmm. That's one way people have a say is by their vote. Another way that people have a say on every day is showing up at the council. And
I agree with that totally.
There's, people lament about those that are the regulars, quote unquote, that show up and have, whatever it is they have to say. But I give kudos to those folks that show up on a regular basis. Absolutely. I really do, because, 90% is just showing up. And we have so many folks
listen.
Now.
When somebody shows up and they have something to say, we take it into account. We don't blow it off. You're totally right.
But the other side of that is that
you got to show up.
You need to show up, number one. But number two, you also need to know the process. And by knowing the process, you know when to show up. So, I would say to those folks out there that are looking at things within the city or within the state, learn what's going on around that. So, for instance, there is a expressway that's potentially going in the Orlando area. Mm-hmm. The Central Florida Expressway Authority is putting in this new roadway potentially, and it's called Palmetto Expressway. So the southwest area, it's right on the Osceola County line. Mm-hmm. And the reason I know about it is a client of ours is looking at doing some development up that way. It's a massively growing area, as you would expect. Mm-hmm. They invested a ton of money in looking at new lots and breaking this out. They've got some additional apartments going in and all this different stuff. And they had it all planned out in this one access road. They met all their traffic counts. Mm-hmm. The Central Florida Expressway Authority comes along and says, oh, by the way, we're going to create a raised roadway right in front of your development.
Right.
So now my guys are like, wait a minute. I have access issues. How am I going to get my people in here? Now, for all the stuff that I'm building, am I actually going to be able to use what I'm building? Is it going to? Are my retailers going to say nobody's going to be able to get to our place? So therefore, I'm not doing my contract anymore. Mm-hmm. So now I had to educate myself as to the process of how is Central Florida Expressway, number one, putting that roadway in. What's the alignment of it? What can I do as a person? So I talked to them and everything else. They've actually invited me to be a part of the process, the planning process. That's and great. Looking at that. The other part is just down the road. It's potentially going right across the entrance of a senior over 55 facility. Mm-hmm. And those folks are not happy. So again, we're looking at ways that they're going to be dealing with that. And I've encouraged them to be involved.
But for your average person that doesn't have you, I don't know if you're on retainer or how that works, or mm-hmm. they've hired you, mm-hmm. like for the average people that aren't developing or in that process, where their, not rights, but, their interests might be, infringed on.
Sure.
For the average people, the commission,
So another great example is
there's going to be developers in those meetings. There's going to be the consultants, everybody who's who's getting paid to be there. Right. Right, but not necessarily the people who live here. Who's their advocate?
The folks in Jensen Beach, when there's a variety of things that were going on up there, became the Green Shirters, and mm-hmm. They bonded together and became a major advocacy group that again, people were heard. People were heard here with when we had our discharges, and trust me, in Tallahassee, they heard all of that. That doesn't mean that every person that was protesting on the discharges knew exactly all the components associated with it. But because they came together, that's one of the reasons that we passed 1379 and Senate Bill 712 a couple of years before that, because we don't want to have another lost summer. So another area of advocacy that has, I think, not necessarily been a positive thing is the diminishment of the regional planning councils and their role in bringing municipalities together. A perfect example of that is Becker Road in the city of Port St. Lucie. They have every right to do what they're doing out there as far as the housing developments. But on the eastern side, it goes into Martin County, and it comes down Murphy Road.
Yes.
I've lived off Murphy Road for 17 years now,
Okay.
and have seen the proliferation of traffic now, and it's going up and
I
up
grew up
and
in
up.
Lighthouse Point. I know.
So, I mean, it's nuts.
Yeah.
But that being said, when those developments were going in, it was after DRIs had been removed by the state. So that coordination between the city of Port St. Lucie, St. Lucie County, and Martin County had gone away. So literally, my wife and I, not being retained by anybody whatsoever, got some folks in the neighborhood. We went down to our county commissioners here in Martin County and said, look, you have an opportunity right now to deal with this and to look at traffic over the next X number of years. And if you don't deal with it, you're going to have some major issues. So we went back and forth on that. And ultimately, Martin County really didn't do anything to deal with it.
Is this before you were politically involved?
Yeah, I was on my way, if you will. I hadn't been elected yet at that time.
Is this part of what got you involved?
No, I was already going to be moving forward and heading towards the state, but it was something that I felt, my wife especially was very adamant about it, and she really wanted to have that coordination.
She's great, by the way.
Thank you.
Recently met.
I think so too.
Yeah, her. She's. I could tell she really backs you up. The two of you are functioning together. She just had nothing but great things to say about you, but I could tell she's got fire in her.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean,
that's behind you.
We drive down Murphy Road. There's a light there at the entrance that we still are wondering why it was ever put in, because all it does is back stuff up. She's like, that light should have been at our entrance at Windstone, because then it would keep the folks back in City of Port St. Lucie and all this. And so it's just interesting, and I love her perspective and her passion. But she also wanted to see Sand Trail turned into an access way going north-south, and that runs on the backside of Evergreen, and there'll be a new bridge over the C-23 at that point in time, just east of the turnpike, and could provide relief directly off of Becker and the intersections up there and the new Veranda Falls. However, the folks didn't necessarily get moving quickly on it, and now there's a new hospital going in, the new tenant hospital, and all the land there is basically used up. So there's no way for putting a bridge landing in and that type of stuff. So unfortunately, that is, in my opinion, now a moot issue and won't happen.
Which is valuable with what you do. You know, do you mind sort of going into what you do professionally, because you're not a career politician?
No, I'm not.
You actually, like me, work for a living. So what is it that you do professionally, and what's your skill set?
So, I mean, I came to Florida. Literally the day after Hurricane Andrew was my first day in the state of Florida.
Wow.
And I took a job in the Keys. I was a marine science instructor in the Keys. So I drove through Homestead the day after Andrew came through. So I saw Florida at its worst, and then I got to Big Pine Key down in the Keys, and I saw Florida at its best, and loved it. But that really exposed me to the environment. From Cape Cod.
Nice.
So I had gotten a biological sciences degree at Union College in Schenectady, New York. And then my dream was to get a job at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And because for whatever reason, I was never able to get a job there. So I ended up hearing about this marine science position down the Keys. I'm like, I'm in, let's go. And then slowly migrated up the coast, got my master's degree at FAU. And that actually was was working for the Water Management District as a student researcher, was working for Florida Atlantic University as a TA, was also working in a law firm. So I basically had 3 jobs, and it was a land development firm in Meisner Square in Boca. So all those jobs together, and then I was doing research on the Kissimmee River. And that was my research project, was looking at the floodplain fish of the Kissimmee River prior to restoration. So years ago, they made the Kissimmee straight, a horrible project that in the name of commerce, and thought it was going to be a great thing. And then they did it in roughly 2 years and made it all straight. And then it took them 28 years to put it back and to put all the oxbows back in. My work looked at all the various floodplain fish there. That got me interested more and more in environment and restoration environment. And when I got done with my master's, I put my resume out, and young family, the whole deal. And so I got a bunch of job offers, and I said, which one pays the highest? And it was a private consulting firm. And so that's how I got involved, and I've never looked back. And I've
So how long have you been in private
consulting since 1995?
Nice.
So I have worked for a variety of firms, and then let me see, it was in 2002 I started my own firm called Crossroads Environmental, and we worked kind of all over the place doing environmental permitting. And then most recently in 2017, I combined with a firm called Engineering, Design, and Construction. I have 3 other partners there, and we are now based in the city of Port St. Lucie. We're actually in tradition in the Christ Fellowship Church up there.
Okay.
So we have, we're just about 60 employees now.
Wow.
And we do everything from surveying to civil engineering, planning, environmental, obviously. And then we also now have an interior design portion of it as well. So, and that handles a lot of our commercial clients. So
what made you want to get into the political sphere? How did you end up, and when exactly was it? What was the impetus behind it?
Sure. So when I started at that law firm in Boca almost 30 years ago now, there was a variety of projects that they were doing, and they were taking it through the process. And so I'd review state regulations. I'd review various development permits or local ordinances. That was kind of my first exposure. And then as I became a consultant, I'm working with people here locally on writing new ordinances, writing different things that are affecting either clients or regions or things like that. And that got me involved a little bit more. Then I got into leadership Martin County. So leadership Martin County was fantastic exposure to kind of how everything works and how the whole process kind of goes down. And
is that Cindy LeConte's baby? You're talking about the chamber?
Yes. Yep. With Joe Catrambone and the whole deal. So I was leadership class 9.
Nice.
And it was a great way to really get good exposure kind of across the entire county, more so than my little microcosm. And then I started working more in St. Lucie County, doing stuff in Palm Beach County, out in Okeechobee. Then I went back, and I was talking with a friend of mine. He said, look, I think it'd be a great thing if you went back and got your MBA. That would be very helpful for helping with your business as well as other things. So I ended up at Florida Atlantic University again for my getting an MBA there. And it's actually an environmental MBA. So it's a specialized degree that looks at the environment and the costs and everything associated with that, but then putting in that business side. And then all of a sudden it was exposure to Leadership Florida. Now I'm really out of my comfort zone.
What's Leadership Florida?
And so Leadership Florida is a program that's loosely affiliated with the Florida Chamber, but it's its own private organization, and now gives you that same leadership, if you will, programs. And where it's once a month for 3 days for I believe it's now 7 months. And so you're out all over the state, from Miami to Pensacola to Orlando to places that you never even heard of. We actually did our first retreat was in the Howie in the Hills, and it's the first time I had ever been there. It was fantastic. We had a great time and I got to know and be exposed to people from literally across the state and understand, man, you really do have an issue with the St. Johns River. Wow, you do have an issue down in Fort Myers about this. Orlando, yes, you do have issues on X, Y, and Z. So these are things that then expanded my horizons even more. Again, reading regulations, as you know, dealing with all kinds of stuff with Lake Okeechobee. And I said, there's got to be a better way of doing some of this stuff. That really got me involved. And then at the time, Representative Harrell was wrapping up her time, and I said, I'm in. I'm going to go for this. And we were basically unopposed up until about a month before the final filing. And a gal from St. Lucie County filed, and we had the most hellacious primary, but I made it through.
Make you better.
You're exactly right. It really did. I would not be the same person I am today without it. But we worked our butts off and got through it. But part of what got me into it also, my dad was a 30-year Navy guy and had always been involved. I tried to go to the service after I graduated, and had gone through the initial screening for the Marine Corps. And I got medically DQ'd by the Marine Corps. This is 1991, and I have no idea why to this day. I was playing rugby at the time, high-level rugby, was just graduated with an honors degree and all this stuff. And I have no idea why I got medically DQ'd to this day. But, so I was never able to serve.
Everything happens like it's supposed to.
Exactly. Yeah. I was never able to serve then. So now I'm able to serve this way. And my dad challenged me. He said, look, that always bothered you. So, why don't you put your money where your mouth is and get in the game? So I got in the game and never looked back.
And I think it's special that you have the skill set that you have in the position that you hold, because often these positions are held by career politicians, right? These are people that don't necessarily have the training or experience. You've been that environmentalist. You've also been in private sector and worked for land developers.
Sure.
You have a pretty balanced, for actually writing policy and setting it. It's pretty balanced and useful tool set to be in that role versus somebody who, who knows what they did previously.
So there's some folks in the legislature that it's interesting. They just took advantage of a timing issue, if you will, and they have no idea what they're doing. And then
I imagine that's a cause of endless frustration.
it can be when they're.
How many of you are there?
There's 120.
Yeah, geez.
And so in the House, this happens obviously more so than ever in the Senate, where there's only 40 individuals over there. That being said, it can be frustrating because you're like, some people have literally no life experience. They went to college and they became a state representative.
Right.
There are some people out there that have had a minor amount, but I really think that life experience is huge in being able to do that job.
Totally.
I mean, how can you relate as a parent to somebody else who's lost a child or who is going through the education system if you have never had a child that's gone through the education system or has been lost, or you have a parent that has gone into an old age home or something like that has deplorable conditions, and you felt helpless because you want to help your mom or your dad and there's no way to do it. So all of these different things are, I think it will life give experiences.
It'll give you backbone. It'll give you spine. It'll give you roots, because you're ultimately making decisions and you will always be influenced by various parties and interests. But if you know what's right, because you have that core, you're going to make good calls. You're going to set better policy, would be my
I believe so. I think that you have to bring in that life experience to your decisions, and then you're able to relate to so many different items that are out there. Now, do I know everything? No, not by any means. I tell you, when I first became a representative, I got hit with a dang fire hose, and it didn't let up for about 24 months. And I finally got through that first session, and I finally could breathe a little bit. I was understanding a little bit more of it. There were some times when I'm looking at doing votes and just skimming the surface and not understanding, what all the other items were associated with it.
Okay, so can I get into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
When you say that, is it more of the reality of the politics, the actual workings of all of those people and interests and dynamics?
Oh, it's definitely 4D chess. No doubt about it. You've got 4 dimensions you're dealing with, which is then you have the personality and the politics. And, if a bill seems like an outlier for a person, there's a reason they filed that bill. It's either a strong interest.
It's a great way to put it.
Or it's a passion of theirs that they've never really wanted to deal with before, but there's a variety of reasons they've done it. So you're looking at that like, all right, why are they actually doing this? Maybe they're setting themselves up for a future position that they want to have. Maybe they're doing it as a favor for somebody else. Maybe it's just that this is their passion project that they've never been able to do before, but now they're doing it. Understanding the motivations as to why somebody's doing something, that's huge.
Right.
That is huge. So
it seems like that would be the liability of the way, because you have two-year terms.
Yes.
Right. And then you do have term limits or no?
We have 4 2-year terms that we're allowed to say. So 8 years total is what we're supposed to to have in the House.
So it would seem like the way that system is set up, we're sort of, you have just enough time to try to set yourself up for your next gig.
Sure. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
So doesn't that incentivize on some level? I mean, this is just my, uninvolved look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that kind of set up not corruption, but at least maybe getting disconnected from who you represent, and looking at, who can help you or what's next? Or
so the disconnection, I would say, look at the people around you. Ask, are they still, after their initial term, are they coming and seeing you and talking to you? Mm-hmm. Is that disconnect, has it happened?
Right.
So do you have somebody that you feel is not like you're able to call as your representative?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's the issue. I think you've nailed it. I have, I'll give kudos to Brian Mass because he has been just out in the public constantly.
He's a real deal, man.
And he has been out there doing some great stuff. And he's constantly in the public.
And being willing to take the darts,
Oh yeah.
To say what.
And give them back out as well.
And give them back out. Say what you think is the right thing. Take the criticism, give it back. That's that public discourse that should help shape policy in your decisions.
100%.
Right. We're throwing ourselves into the arena to take some licks where it seems like sometimes the other representatives sort of hide in Tallahassee, or
Sure.
you never see them. They're not really willing to face any criticism.
They're off doing a fundraiser. They're off doing whatever it may be.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't want to be too critical, but I do think we could do it better. So,
sure.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that Chris, I want to make sure that I show up. I'm there for a variety of things. I like to go to, people look at me like I'm crazy if I want to go to Rivers Coalition, but I want to go to Rivers Coalition because
you're either there or one of your people every time.
Absolutely.
There's not a meeting that you're not represented there in some form,
mm-hmm.
listening to what's going on and taking that in, which I think is amazing.
Well, we need to,
because you're the only one. Yeah.
The folks there are very vocal. I'm actually was one of the founding members of Rivers Coalition mm-hmm. through the Palm City Chamber. Yep. And happy to be a part of it in all sincerity. It may not be the nicest setting at times.
But it's good.
I may get a lot of darts and stuff, but that's fine. I should not be in this position if I can't take a dart here and there. Mm-hmm. So now look, I'm willing, and I've told people this, I'm willing to meet with anybody. I'm willing to have a sit down and talk. If we're respectful, we may have differing views. But if you start to be disrespectful, right. or if you're, outright, saying things that are not true that right. I haven't said, we're done. I'm not doing it.
If it's not productive.
So, but if you and I have opposing, sides, I'm fine with that. Mm-hmm. And we should have that discourse, at times. That's how you make a better sausage, is you've got to have a little bit of give and take. But, kind of to go back to what we were looking at for representatives overall, if you don't have that life experience, that's okay as long as you're going out in the community and you're getting it. As long as you're making yourself available to those folks. There's a guy down in Miami who, young guy. He was an aide before. Now he's gone on. He's a rep. I think he's 27 years old. And so you wouldn't think he has a lot of life experience, but the guy's always in the community, mm-hmm. always doing something.
Yep.
And so that has given him that experience to be able to represent. So I think, there's, again, two sides to it. And, I did a speech years ago when I became the president of the Palm City Chamber, and the speech was entitled Just Show Up. And that's really what it's all about, is just showing up. Out of that, Ed Campy remembered that speech, Just Show Up. He reminds me about it even today. And that was one of the things that got him involved in politics.
He's got that similar philosophy as far as I can tell. He's there.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to show up.
Yep.
He'll talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is, and I know, things are constantly evolving. What's your goal? What are your goals? What's the future? And again, everything, it depends on who's in what seat and
sure.
what's happening. And
sure.
what would you like, how would you like God to use you
mm-hmm.
Going forward with your skill
I think
set? Where do you think you could be useful?
There's a lot of opportunities. And, what I found in politics is that that's always evolving.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that I'm in a position where I'm working for a governor at some point. It may be that I'm able to become a senator and take over Senator Harrell's position when she's done. Right now, that is my focus is to go into that office and hopefully become a senator.
What's your time frame? Where are you at with your term?
Well, Ms. Harrell, so she was slated to go out at the end of my term in the Florida House.
Got it.
Because of redistricting, they actually flipped a coin, literally, in the Senate, and all of those with odd districts got X number of years, and all those with even districts, because they have a 4-year term, so they alternate those. So she ended up getting an extra 2 years as a result. So she'll have 10 years in the Senate if she chooses to use her entire time there.
Okay.
And so she would be done 2 years after I'm done as a rep. And so I would be sitting home, if you will, for 2 years or something along those lines.
So that's not going to be 24. That's 2 years from now.
That'd be 26. Yeah.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I'm.
We'll see how it goes. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I'm sorry. That'd be 28.
28.
Right.
When?
And there's a lot that can happen between now and then.
Right.
And that'll also be the same time that we're seeing, a run for governor. Actually, no, run for governor will be 26. So depending on who that is, I think there's some early lines out there, at least on the Republican side. I don't know the depth of the Democrat side, but I think there's a lot of folks that are lining up on the Republican side. I would say every cabinet member that you have in the state of Florida currently is potentially going to be run for it, including the First Lady, as I've heard her name put out there. And then Matt Gaetz as well as Byron Donalds are two others that are out there. And, I'll publicly say right now, if Byron signs up, count me on that train. I would love to work with Byron and see what he has in the future. And, we'll see what happens with that. But I think he's proven himself as a great leader. I got to serve with him for one session in the Florida House before he went to Congress. But we'll see. He's got a bright future ahead of him, whatever he chooses to do.
Do you feel like you're able to get more done? I don't know the exact power dynamics, but in the Senate, do you feel like the Senate has the ability to get more done, I'd imagine, versus 120 people?
So in the Florida House, we have a maximum of 7 bills that we're allowed to file.
Got it.
When I first started, we were allowed a maximum of 6 bills. So they've increased it by one. In the Senate, there is no maximum. You can file as many bills as you want to. That's also a reflection of the fact that we do have 120 reps and only 40 senators. So with 120 reps filing 7 bills each, it's a heck of a lot of bills. And then you've got over here on the other side, and then that doesn't include committee bills. It doesn't include, other types of bills, memorials, resolutions, things like that. So I think in the Senate, you do have a bit more autonomy. And you're able to do, I don't feel like doing this. I do feel like doing that as a result of having so many different bills over there. But we'll see. I think it's again, as a senator, you have that, you do have you have more staff members, you have more responsibility, more geographical area you cover. So I think that they call it the upper chamber as well. So, and you don't see necessarily you do see more seasoned politicians go into that role.
What resources do you have to leverage? And when I say this, I mean, in the city I have Mike Mortel, I've got basically 2 attorneys now on retainer to poke and ask questions and try to get, where I think we should be going buttoned up. Do you have obviously your team?
Yep.
Right. You guys have the ability to hire staff.
So I have 2 staff members. Yes. They're fantastic. One's Samantha Rosenberg, who is a local gal, grew up in Jensen Beach.
Great.
And she has been just fantastic. She actually she graduated from Florida State University. Go Seminoles. She was 20. So smart kid.
What does she handle for you?
She handles all of our bill filings, a lot of our work back and forth with other reps, make sure that our appointments are set in Tallahassee, all that type of stuff. And then Heather Schott, she is here locally working the office even during session, making sure we have our local appointments, getting constituent casework done, and gets that initial, somebody has a problem, Heather will work with them and start to work through the process. And then if she needs my help, then we elevate it and take care of it that way. But, that side of it, the constituent casework, is really something that, we've prided ourselves on, been able to help a lot of folks. We recently had a bill this past year that gave a fair amount of money towards kids to go through homeschooling or additional monies, and it was not expanded to the public schools. So number one, I had this forum with a lot of our local folks here that have their kids in public school, and they were kind of ticked off about what was happening. And
how would that expand into public school, though, right? You're talking about that stipend?
It was giving a voucher.
Right.
And my understanding, as the bill was explained to me and was going through the process, was that there was an $8,000 stipend to use however you wanted. If you wanted to use it for tutoring, if you wanted to use it for homeschooling, if you wanted to use it for whatever education related, it was available to you. Mm-hmm. I was incorrect, and it was only available for folks that are in homeschool or in private school.
Right.
So that was something that, again, as we have,
with private
3,000 bills that are coming at us,
it's been available for private school already,
if in a certain income level.
And then,
but
now
it was expanded
it's
to everybody.
Homeschool.
Yep.
To where you can use it for tutoring, and
correct.
What it was used for private school was actually tuition.
Mm-hmm.
It was paying for tuition. So
right.
how would that work with public school, because those tax dollars are being consumed by the school?
I think that the public schools the students within public schools should have an opportunity to utilize even a portion of it. Okay, to say, look, I'm struggling in reading. I need to be able to have an outside tutor associated with it, or I can't get algebra down. And if I don't get this down, I'm not going to have the scores that I need to get to X, Y, or Z. So those are some things that I think that we should be having available more to our public school kids. So again, giving the parents the choice of, I want to be involved with my kid. I want my kid to be able to have X, Y, and Z. And if they choose not to be involved, that's okay too. One of the bills that I did was the first one that gave the teachers a significant raise in salary and started their salary at $46,500. That was one of the bills that I did in my freshman year. And we have consistently increased salary every year since. Why? Because Florida was really bad at overall education, and we have increased that every single year, and our metrics have gone up as a result across the state. I remember a time when Martin County was the number one school district that was out there, and it was because of investment.
That's why we came up from Miami.
And it took a dip, and now it's on its way back up again. And I think that the team that's over there is doing a great job. In the meantime, the St. Lucie County School District, they just crushed it. They have gone way up and really worked hard to make sure that they were providing things there. There's a guy named Wayne Gent that had been working up there. So all that being said, now our region is finally, I think, doing really well in the school system overall.
Michael Maine seems like a stud.
Yes.
He seems like he's really going to run with that position and do a really good job. Mm-hmm. So I'm optimistic.
And I'm excited about the school board that's there and the people that are associated with it.
Exactly.
But, again, we as a state and the state legislature needs to make sure that we continue to give them the resources that if you're going to go to public school, and I went to public school for 9 years when I was growing up in Massachusetts, and I ended up winning a scholarship to a private school because of that base that I had in public school gave me the ability to win the scholarship, and so I ended up going to a private school for my final 3 years. Mm-hmm. But that being said, I am a strong believer in public schools now, but that's not for everybody. My daughter, she was exposed to the public school system, but she could not thrive in that system. And we were blessed enough to have the resources to be able to not have her in the public school system where she was just being lost. And it was just her personality. So she ended up going to private school, and then she went to UF after that, and she's now fantastic. She's been off. She lives in Miami now and is a realtor down there. And
awesome.
She left home after college and never came back. So I consider that a success.
How old? You have one kiddo?
Yep, she's 29.
29, man. You got a 29-year-old. That seems like it's forever away.
Yeah. Wow.
Mine are 5'4", 2 and 6 months.
You have a lot of adventure in front of you.
Yeah.
No doubt.
29 just seems impossible.
Mm-hmm. Well, she's getting married this year, so
wow, congrats, man.
Yeah, it'll be great. We're looking
Does
forward
it feel
to that.
good? Your kid's fully cooked. You're
Absolutely.
Good?
Yeah.
You did
She's
your
great.
job.
She's great. Her fiance is fantastic. We just had Christmas together with them, so I mean, I'm very blessed, no doubt about it. And the provisions that have been given to me, I feel like I've been a pretty good steward with those. At some point in my life, my afterlife, I'll be judged on that, and we'll see what happens there.
You're not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at about, between our first recording and second, we're at about probably an hour.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you want to? I mean, there's a lot of things I'd like to talk to you about, but we'll maybe save it for a future one of these.
Sure.
I would love to check back in with you as you feel like there's, you're out of session or you're getting ready to go in or whatever. You want to recap?
Let's do a recap after session. I will say, one of the things that you touched on earlier.
Yes.
Was about our two-year term limits and that type of stuff, and 8 years, and what does that do?
Any idea of reforming that? Or
So
is it good the way it is? Or?
The Florida Constitution has been changed around a couple times. Several years ago, there was an initiative called 8 is Enough, and that 8 is Enough initiative is what gave us our 4 2-year term limits.
Yes.
So prior to that, we didn't have term limits. It also gave 8 years total, so 2 4-year terms for the Senate. What I would suggest is that has empowered a lot of lobbyists and lobbying firms, and also empowered staff. So staff will say, look, that's not the way we do things up here, to a freshman, and the freshman saying, and I'm a first term legislator. So because we have 4 times, we call them freshman, sophomore, junior, senior.
Yep.
Like I'm in my junior term. That being said, so they'll say that to them. And the freshman's like, well, okay, I guess that's what. And the reality is that person who was elected can decide to do it any way they want to. But you don't learn that boldness until your sophomore, junior year, and being able to say back to staff, no, we're going to do it this way. This is, what we've researched. This is how it. So that power is there. The lobbyists remember everything that's happened over the last 10, 20 years. And you'll see some bills that were filed and didn't make it through. They'll come back after 8 years or 9 years because a new team has now brought that same, if you will, bad bill, or in some cases good bills, brought it back. Usually because there's a whole new environment. Well, it varies. But so I would suggest that if we did 12 years, and had that as our term limits, because I do believe in term limits. I absolutely do. I think it's what we need to be doing, because we need to get new people
longer
in.
terms.
And so, but by running every 2 years, what do we have to do? We have to raise money and raise money and raise money. Every time we're out of session, we're raising money. So if we have, say, 3 4-year terms for your reps, and maybe 2 6-year terms for your senators, just like they do, Senate in Washington.
Yes.
I believe that would lower the amount of fundraising that is required to be done, and you would have an opportunity then to really focus on your job a little bit more so.
If I had to run in 24 right now, right, that would be a 2-year term for me. That would be a nightmare.
Well, number one, you're behind in your fundraising.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
all it would be about is campaigning. The whole thing from beginning to end. You could never really settle into the position of trying to really set good policy, because you're never going to stop thinking about who your donors are.
Well, part of showing up all the time is campaigning. You got to remember that. So, as a politician, you're always campaigning. You wake up in the morning and you say, please, Lord, don't let me say something stupid today. I mean, I'm going to
say lots of stupid things. That's the best part.
But that's kind of the political realm. You're always campaigning. You're always on it. So, but by doing the 2 years, you're also always raising money.
Right.
And for my the first time I ran, I raised about $450,000. And the gal who ran against me was backed by about $1 million. So she outspent me 2 to 1 in a roughly.
What does the average seat cost in the House?
It depends where you are, honestly. In Orlando, there's a gentleman there, David Smith, who's he's now running for his senior term, if you will. He'll probably raise $1.5 million to as much as $2 million for that seat there. And we're paid about $29,000 is our salary.
Right.
But to have that vote, to have that ability to have, and right now we have a supermajority in the Florida House. That money is being spent. In Miami, it's regularly $750,000. I will raise $500,000 is typically what we end up doing between hard and soft.
Wow.
And
That's amazing.
my hard, I think I was close to $200,000 last time around between a primary and a general that I had. I didn't have a primary, I only had the general, but yeah. So we keep raising that kind of money, and I don't want to have to do that.
Right.
I think that, you touched on it before about, what does that cause out there? I don't think to be honest with you, if you're being bought for $1,000 check from somebody, you shouldn't be a politician.
Right.
You should not. You should be able to, thank you very much. I appreciate your support, and be able to still make your own decisions.
That's my hope, is that, if we're doing it right, you are, and I do think you do this, you're standing for something, right? Mm-hmm. You represent something to people who want to help support you.
Sure.
You're not looking at that $1,000, $500 check as leverage, for, whatever the decision that comes in front of you. It's truly going to be weighed out by what's the right thing. And that's why you're being supported.
And it's also about your relationship. It's about your relationship with those people that have brought the ideas forward. Mm-hmm. It's about the relationship associated with who's advising you. Do you trust that person? Do you trust that what they're telling you is the truth, or that they don't have a ulterior motive that's behind it? So that's why, I continue to try to talk to people. Now, folks will say, well, hey, you voted on this and that, and you never talked to me about it. Well, again, we have 3,000 bills that we're going through. We'll probably take, 700 votes.
I hit on this earlier. Do you have a lawyer? Do you have staff lawyers or somebody? Mm-hmm. Okay, you do.
So, but, we have staff that we can go to, we can talk to about the various issues. We have staff directors that we can talk to. There's a house attorney.
That's great. Okay.
There's house staff members, but and then the one good thing that we have that you don't is that we can have discussions with all of our voting folks. Nice. It's not, and part of that is, how do you have sunshine when you have that big of a body, and then I'm working on a bill, say, with you, and we're co-sponsoring it together. How can I possibly not have a discussion about what we're going to present and how we're going to move that forward? How can I, if I'm a chairman and I'm meeting with you to discuss your bill, how can I possibly have a discussion that's in the sunshine when I'm discussing your bill and saying, hey, what are you doing in this part? And, my staff director has an issue with this and that. There's no way to do it. So, I think
if it's not in the House and the Senate, why is it in local municipality?
That's a great question.
Because to me, I get the idea of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things like term limits that nobody will publicly want to object to, but functionally it creates posturing. So if I can't talk to you before we get there, and you've talked to who, you've taken in, you're coming into that meeting with your decision, your talking points, and now we're so all over the place.
So you're coming at it though from a position of without having a nefarious motive with it. You're like, hey, I just want to be able to understand what you're thinking before I go ahead and do this and impact what's happening. Unfortunately, as we saw in Palm Beach County years ago, there was collusion that was going between a couple of the county commissioners there, and that's one of the things that prompted Sunshine, was that they were actually putting their private interests above the public interests and utilizing their votes to collude to make sure that they did that, and then they were getting a payday as a result of doing that.
Doesn't that violate some other kind of...
all kinds of ethics. Right. And yes, they ended up in jail.
Right.
So
to where it's bigger than Sunshine.
Most certainly. But Sunshine was then put in place to say, all right, you guys can't talk to each other before this. And oh, by the way, if you do, you could go to jail as a result of Sunshine violations. Now, I think, frankly, that two commissioners should be able to talk to each other about what's happening. Now, if you 4 of you get together in the same room and the public's excluded from that, I don't think that's right.
Right.
You know, I don't think that is good and proper. But
does that happen in like the House or the Senate? Is there groups meeting, or is it usually just kind of one-on-one? You guys are having coffee and picking
a lot of times it's one-on-one, but you know, in my house, for instance, you know, there's 4 of us there and watching TV or whatever, and a bill is bound to come up. Hey, what do you think about blah blah blah? And we'll each give our thoughts on it, or hey, I haven't read that one yet. You know, tell me about it. So those are things where it's very useful, because we're able to have those conversations, discussions back and forth. And then I can go back and say, hey, this came up in a discussion yesterday to a staff member, and say, hey, can you help me out with this? You know, is this really what the intent is associated with this, or is there something else happening here?
Yep.
So that's where it's helpful. And I would say that to the scale that you have here in the city, you know, if you wanted to talk to, you know, somebody on there for whatever reason, I think you should be able, personally, I think you should be able to have a discussion that is not covered by sunshine, that you're able to, you know, have those here and there. Now, somebody out there may be listening to this and saying, oh, Overdorf wants to blow, you know, sunshine laws away. No, I don't. I think that they're useful. I think that it prevents things that happened with nefarious purpose with it. And, you know, I still think that I necessarily shouldn't know, if I'm on the council with you, how you're going to vote. Hey, I'm going to, on X, Y, and Z, I'm going to be up. I want you to be down, that kind of stuff. I think but I think you need to be able to discuss what's coming through.
Just to be more productive. And like I said, you prevent the posturing when you get up there, you know, where somebody's representing whoever their interests are, you know, who's talked to them. And then it's coming out of left field and nobody can seem to agree. And a vote comes through that's stupid.
But I can tell you this: if I went forward and I brought a Sunshine Act reform bill,
you'd get skewered.
I would, it would be done.
I know.
So those are the things. Then, I mean, all local government personnel, folks that are elected there, they want a modification. I shouldn't say all. I'd say most want the ability to be able to talk to their compatriots. And
I can function within it. I just end up asking a lot of questions and trying to be inquisitive and pull out of versus posture, which I'm learning that more and more, you know, so I can navigate within it, but I think it would be more productive.
Well, you're still in the fire hose phase.
I'm feeling like I'm coming out of that, but yeah, I still am.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And so, and you know, it's interesting too, because you go into it with, all right, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And
I just want to make it better. I don't want to change the world. But
and I'm obviously using that lightly, but
I know what you mean.
But you have your ideals, so don't lose your ideals. But at the same time, now you're understanding how you work with people. You're understanding that I have to do this in order to get that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're understanding the personalities and the nuances of politics.
What's been interesting for me to learn is often the issue is not the issue. So I come into it very one-dimensional, right? Like this is what we're talking about. This is why this makes sense or doesn't, and this is what we should do. And often there's all of these other implications with a yes or no vote that are a part of this.
Sure.
That I didn't even understand was happening, right? So trying to create bridges and not back people into corners or have people save face if maybe that wasn't their initial.
Right.
Trying to figure all of that stuff out so that the best thing that could be, you know, the best approval or whatever it is that we're talking about, the best case scenario for that thing can be ultimately what happens.
Sure.
That's been the learning process, and I cannot imagine that with 120 people.
Yeah.
And their staff.
I mean, so I have to also say, you know, folks ask me about, well, what's it like? You know, do you not get along with the Democrats at all? Is there, and it's not that. No. I mean, shoot, there's some Republicans I don't get along with.
Right.
But there are a lot of Democrats up there that I have friendships with. We call each other outside of session.
Good.
During the summer.
You're human beings.
I work with them, but there are some that are so far over the edge, and unfortunately our press, which I also call the fourth wing of government, the press really highlights that divide, and oftentimes will highlight that rep that is way out to one side and says, you see, they're not getting along with us at all and blah, blah, blah. And it's not the case whatsoever. So We did a study. Some of the stats that came through, I think it was 85% of the bills that we passed this past year had a super majority of members that voted for it. So in other words, both Democrats and Republicans, and I think like 70% of the bills were unanimous.
That's a nice thing about not having sunshine, right? You can iron it all out and have a unified front.
Well, it also is the public, or by the time it gets to the floor, remember it's gone through at least 3 committees for the most part.
Yep.
It's had that time of curing, if you will, and people have had their issues taken care of. So by the time it gets to the floor, oftentimes it's going to go through. I've only seen a couple of bills that have not passed the floor after being introduced. So by the time it gets to the floor, it's pretty much going to get through.
What committees are you on? I didn't even ask you.
So I sit on the Water Quality Committee, the Environmental Appropriations Committee, Vice Chair of Judiciary, on Civil Justice.
Interesting.
And
okay.
then also on Commerce as well. And then I'm
of
the chair
those,
of a...
What did you really want to be on? Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no problem. No problem at all. Obviously enjoy water quality. That's a committee and Judiciary Committee has been fascinating. So what is great about that is it's given me exposure to an area that I'm not necessarily 100% comfortable with. So I'm now working and learning a whole heck of a lot more by being in that position. Mm-hmm. And it's forced me to really understand, all right, how is this affecting this? And does A, what does that do to Z? So those types of things have really pushed me to be a better holistic legislator in understanding all these different items.
I would imagine there's a ton of carryover to the environmental side and writing policy.
Oh, heck yeah, absolutely. And then, also, we talked about some omnibus bills and some train bills. Senate Bill 712 was, really turned into, if you will, a train bill, but it was an environmental train bill. It had a heck of a lot of stuff that we're still doing. Last year, my bill, House Bill 1379, had a lot.
Can you characterize that? What? Because I thought that was such a win. Mm-hmm. Not to throw you a softball, but I thought that was so great.
It was.
Can you characterize that for people who may not understand what 1379 offers to us here?
From just skimming the surface on that, it is a huge win for water quality.
Right.
And number one, for the first time, it forces monitoring to happen within our basin management action plan. The city of Stewart is within
the
St. Lucie BMAP.
Yeah.
And so the BMAPs, the basin management action plans, were set up to monitor water quality. Well, that monitoring had been happening, but there really hasn't been a lot of enforcement.
Was it self-reported or what?
No, DEP did a lot of monitoring. Okay. In fact, there's a gentleman that now works for me that was running a lot of their water quality program and looking at it. And you see on TCPOM where X, Y, and here's the water quality for this and that. The issue was that the TMDLs, or total maximum daily loads.
Yes.
So these are things from everything from dissolved oxygen to phosphorus to nitrogen.
Yes.
They weren't necessarily being controlled, shall we say. And so they were not being achieved. The only way to achieve that is then to set up some kind of a water quality cleansing. And so you saw it with C44 in the reservoir there. You saw it with Calkins. They were doing that, but not necessarily in a regional or holistic approach.
Right. How could you?
And so now you're now required, as part of 1379, all local government has to have a plan to be achieving TMDLs within 10 years. And by the way, you also have to have a plan within 10 years of how you're going to be getting sewer, people off of septic and onto sewer throughout your municipality. So that is also a requirement.
What's the next step besides having the plan in your?
It's a plan and it's an implementation. So by the 10-year time frame, you have to have implemented and moving forward with the septic to sewer conversions, with the actual water quality. So another part of that is there's a stormwater rule that's coming through. It's going to be ratified this year.
Yep.
And all new local development. And I think you're going to see a big private investment in water quality. So now you're going to have local government that has to clean up water. So what are they going to do? They're going to put it on the backs of the landowners. They're going to put it on the backs of their constituents. Well, I can only fit so much into the box that I'm given as a developer. And if I'm able now to say, hey, Chris, I'm going to pay you to clean up my water instead. We're in the same basin. You're just a little ways up, but I'm going to pay you to clean up my water instead. The net benefit is that the water is being cleaned up. My net benefit is I can put a little bit more on my postage stamp than what I could otherwise, but I'm still achieving what I need to for the environment. So I think you're going to see what's called water quality trading is going to come into play. And that has seen a huge success in Chesapeake Bay, where you saw a huge cleanup there. Narragansett Bay it's evolving. In North Carolina, there's a fair amount of water quality trading that's happening up that way. And again, have been.
How long has that been going
positives.
on up there for you to see?
Gosh, Narragansett. Chesapeake Bay. I think it's been about a 20-year program, but and obviously started slow and then has really taken off. And you've seen now a lot of the environment has returned.
Nice. And
so there's some very, very positive things that are happening there.
What are the teeth for? You got to do it in 10 years, and if not, teeth.
DEP has those teeth. Those rules have been and are being written as we go forward. Just on the septic sewer side, it's the teeth are money, to be honest with you. And if you're not complying with this, you're not going to be getting additional funding from the state for a variety of stuff.
Got it. See, that's what I would think. Good. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
And what else was in 1379?
I mean, so there's $100 million that's it's a part of the Indian River Lagoon specifically dedicated towards that. There's a dedicated funding source for doing land purchases now across the entire state. So additional water quality programs, land purchases, the monitoring associated with water quality. I mean, it's a lot to unpack, but there was one of the reasons that, I was really proud to be able to go to Rivers Coalition and talk about it. And it's kind of an infamous meeting that I was at because they really hadn't read the bill. And they're telling me they want all these things and they want this enforcement and that enforcement, yet it was there. They didn't really understand what Senate Bill 712 had done as far as BMPs, excuse me. And these are opportunity where it's a quote unquote voluntary program to put on your land. But if you don't do a BMP on your land to take care of nutrients, then you're required to go to water quality monitoring instead. So it was lost on the group there that in fact now it is a mandatory program.
That's why I think these kind of conversations are going to be great because you're in the eye of the hurricane getting that all put together.
Sure.
And it doesn't always... No, we don't always read those bills.
Sure.
So to have you encapsulate that into human speak for us,
sure.
It's so perfect to understand, what exactly
and that's part of the job.
Yep.
We've got to be able to do that and be willing to have those conversations and not be afraid of talking about what it is you've done or are doing and the process with that. Because if you don't do that, then you have misunderstandings. And I don't blame anybody at Rivers Coalition about that whatsoever. I think it's just it's a question again of I didn't do my job as well as I should have of having the conversations with them as the process is going through.
I mean, not to characterize Rivers Coalition, but at least in this area, it can kind of feel like everybody's against you with the river.
Sure.
So I do get that, that tone can happen where, wait, are you actually helping me?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, wait, you are? Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Well, and there are other organizations that are out there that no matter what we do and what would be positive, they're going to continue to say, this is horrible. We have this problem. We have that problem. And I'll probably piss some people off with this statement too, but
good.
Primarily it's because, they need to raise money. And in order for them to continue to exist, they need to raise money and there has to be a problem. We can transfer that across to, from healthcare to the environment to roadways to whatever. There are groups out there that exist solely to raise money to have their own, particular
carved out
cause.
Space. Yeah,
exactly. And so if we do fantastic things because of their advocacy, all of a sudden they're going to be out of a job because they don't need to raise money for it anymore. So there's always going to be a problem with some of these groups, no matter what we do.
I will say with 1379, what I thought was useful, important, is with how much development is going to happen that you can't stop.
Mm-hmm.
To have at the same time, we're carving out land and land act to try to help with watersheds. The half-cent sales tax, Martin County Forever is trying to do, piggyback with that and help purchase land and just overall to be really truly concerned, not just throw money at, but start to create policy and shape BMAPs. And I thought that was great. We're often in those environments, it can be just focused on the lobbying side, what the developers want. And to have that other piece of it to that component where you're looking at conservation and water quality while we're inevitably developing I thought that represented sort of your background with that balance.
Thank you.
That I mentioned before. So
we've had.
I hope for more of that. So I'm trying to encourage you where maybe you get lashed. More and more of that, please, because as we continue to grow, if there's not the focus on conservation as well, I do think it puts Florida at risk. Obviously.
Well, you have to remember also. I would encourage anybody who thinks that in all of Martin County has been developed, take a drive out west. Just do the loop of Martin Grade 710 and back on 76, and you will see thousands of acres that have not been developed. Take a drive out to the shores of Lake Okeechobee, and you'll see, within Martin County that so much has not been developed, and that's also by design because we had our urban service boundary, and I think that the urban service boundary has served its purpose, but now I think we're at the process or the beginning of kind of expanding that urban service boundary, which is something that is a very sticky and very hard issue. But I think you're going to see it expand somewhat, and I think that's why some of these developments that are happening on the edge of the urban service boundary that are so massive yet are saving a lot of land. I think those are positive, and disclaimer, I'm working on one of them. But I think that they are positives because you're seeing such a low density in many of these and a huge amount of land that's being conserved. So I think that creates almost a natural barrier to development. Now, the next area that I think you're going to see a high amount of development in is in western St. Lucie County Martin County. I apologize. Around Indiantown. And Indiantown's been,
they're blowing up.
And they give a great amount of workforce housing. There's a lot of industry that should be happening in that area there. I think there's some great opportunities within Indiantown, and I think it's kind of that unharnessed gem of Martin County, and I think you're going to see a fair amount of stuff happening there over the next 15, 20 years.
What I've noticed that I appreciate about Indiantown is because it's ag land that's being converted, it seems like the cost is low enough that they can build single-family homes and town things you can own, where, more urban with SB 102 and, just the drive for apartments, it seems like there's less and less opportunity for people to be able to own something, which for me, I see as a huge hedge against almost all things evil.
Sure.
Is the ability to own property. So I do appreciate that about Indiantown is whenever we do those joint meetings and they're throwing up what's coming through the pipeline, a lot of this is development that a person could own.
And we haven't even talked about, the Indiantown High School, which I think is a huge win. I think everybody should have an opportunity to get a great job, but not everybody has to go to college to do it.
Right.
And so a skills high school combined with, some of the things that are happening now with Indian River State College, and they have a whole new center up there that we were able to help them out with that's looking at welding and air conditioning and body work and all these items that...
I've been through more school than a lot of people, you too. I mean, I think the future is, the people who do skilled...
Absolutely.
You used to think of it as blue collar. These people are making more than doctors and lawyers.
How would you like to be able to, come out with your certificate with no debt? And next thing you know, you have a starting job as a welder at $75 a year. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty darn good money. That's just starting.
The guy that 4 or 5 years ago came out and polished my terrazzo wouldn't come out for less than $2,000. Right. I have a crack through part of it. I'm like, can you just a couple $100 or something? Take you a minute just to make sure it's done properly and you're using the right comp. No, we don't come out for less than $2,000.
Right.
And he slammed.
Right.
It's not worth the time.
No. And so this is that's the skill side of it.
Yep.
That again, and that's one of the things I actually ran on is that skills training, and so we've been able to deliver on what we're looking at in the very beginning is how people can now get a new job just by doing their skills training. And I think, again, not everybody is that college student. Not everybody's going to be that person that wants to go through that degree process. And I think that's great. I think we have to have those people out there.
Totally. Times are changing, man. Yes.
We have a real low amount of diesel mechanics, diesel marine mechanics. That was something that Indian River State College has really taken it on.
Half of your boomers have retired. Mm-hmm. The other half are on the way out.
Yep. Huge skills gap coming.
The Gen X crew can't keep up with all of those human beings and what they've been doing. And it's really hard to find people that know what they're doing and will work. And also that are not just completely focused on, that small 6-inch screen that's in front of them and constantly on their phones. True.
We've got to have those people.
Physical capacity to fix things.
Yep. And that have that hands-on desire to do it, and that have that ability to, get off the couch, get out there, do the things that need to get done. And
otherwise, the cost of services, not necessarily goods. I know I'm a budding economist as well. Goods, it seems like, will be a global issue, but services, local services, doors, windows, getting your car fixed, welding.
Absolutely.
That stuff goes through the roof, right? Because there's nobody to do it.
Nobody at all.
And so whoever will pay the best price.
I can't tell you, I'm involved a lot with Treasure Coast Builders Association. They are constantly looking for skilled labor, looking for folks that are out there that can really handle the job. And
I'll pay you whatever
hard.
You want. Yeah.
It's hard to have them come in. I mean, shoot, even in my company, we're hiring folks for the survey department, and you're going out and surveying in the field. And, a lot of our guys don't last more than a year, because they don't want to be out in the heat. They don't want to be out and doing this. But then, we have some of the folks that have been with us for 10 years that are fantastic and that they love doing what they're doing. But again, it's just finding those people.
There was one more thing, if you don't mind, that I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
And it came up at that Alliance, Christian Alliance meeting, was the human trafficking background that you have. Do you mind talking about that? Because I had never heard about that before with you, and I thought that was great.
Well, it's an area that that my wife and I have both been very strong in talking about and taking some action with, and I appreciate you bringing it up. It's something we haven't talked about today at all. So when I first ran for office, my wife made me promise that I would get involved with human trafficking and do legislation that would help to abate human trafficking. Roughly 18 years ago now, almost 20 years, she actually held the very first summit on human trafficking here in the Treasure Coast. And she brought together all of these different pastors, had invited them. And Pastor Todd from Christ Fellowship Church was one of the only pastors actually to show up.
Wow.
And so we started this dialogue, and she, at that time, it was sex trafficking was the primary at the time. And we actually looked at it as sex labor was how that was kind of being characterized. The human trafficking element hadn't even really been involved yet. So all that being said, one of the very first bills I ever did very first bill I filed was on human trafficking. And that was the last bill that was actually approved that year on the House floor. And it established a direct service organization, which raises money for training. It established, you go through and you look at all of the next time you stop at a rest stop on the Turnpike or 95, you'll see a poster there about human trafficking. That was that bill.
Yep.
You see hoteliers, restaurateurs, spa facilities are all trained.
Even in my continuing ed, we have hours now that are associated with trafficking. That's that bill?
That was an evolution of that bill, yes. So all of that now comes into play. And I've been on the direct service organization called the Florida Alliance Against Human Trafficking for the past 5 years. This past May, the Speaker of the House, Paul Renner, actually appointed me now to be on the statewide Florida Human Trafficking Council. Nice. So I serve with the Attorney General, and I serve in that elevated capacity. At the same time, he then appointed my wife to take my seat on the Florida Alliance.
Good.
So she now works there. I'm on the state side. And this past year, we had a huge fundraiser down at the Breakers, and we're going to have that again this coming year. It was a great success. We raised about $600,000.
Nice.
And all of that money goes back towards training.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't go back to victims. Okay. It goes back towards training. It goes back to
training cops, training first responders.
You got it. Across the board, as well as putting systems into schools, putting systems into more hotels. Across the board, we're doing ways that we can bring.
How big of a problem is this, right? Because you know what's going on. I'm sure you know the numbers. You know what is the reality of this issue in Florida, in Orlando, Miami, here. What is the reality?
So the first thing is, this is the fastest growing industry worldwide. Drugs is still the number one industry throughout our entire world. Number two now is human trafficking. Mm-hmm. And you have to remember this includes two things, not just sex trafficking, but also labor trafficking as well. So those two items. Now, Florida continues to be number three throughout our entire country for calls related to human trafficking. We can have busts anywhere. I bet that if we put our mind to it, we would find some trafficking operations that are happening here within the city of Stuart.
And this is not just illegal immigration, an issue there. This is
no, not at all.
Throughout.
I mean, this is so one of the gateways that we're finding is through a variety of your chats associated with gaming or chats associated with a variety of online platforms. They then lure somebody in. The next thing you know, they're in the system. They've got a picture of a teen or something that's in a compromising position. They then say, look, I'm going to release this picture to all your friends unless you do X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
And we've seen that happen over and over again. It's called utilizing that as extortion, if you will. And what we're calling it now is sextortion. So they're utilizing this to get what they want. And then as they just get deeper and deeper and deeper in the hole, and until either A, there is a suicide involved, B, they're so far into human trafficking, they're not getting out. Or in the rare cases, they're coming forward and exposing what has been happening. And so we're trying to get more to a place where we can have those individuals come forward and expose and say, look, this is what's happening to me. We need to stop this. Now, also, we've seen layers and layers of the labor trafficking / sex trafficking happening with massage parlors, with strip joints, with different things like that, where somebody's coming in. And I'm not saying that all adult establishments are bad, because there are some very good people that are out there that are running these things. There's a need for it apparently. I can't say I frequent a place like that, but that being said, we have one of our regulations was they had to have a on-site review of everybody who has worked there, picture, ID, social security number, everything, and then available for inspection at any time. And we found that some of the places didn't have that. They were immediately fined. They actually found the trail went down a long ways. And so there may be somebody here that's tied into a company in New York or into California or to Ohio or wherever else it may be. And then that's related to some kind of a smuggling operation.
But do you have like a state task force or somebody who investigates this?
So and that's one of the things that the traffickers take advantage of. Let's say that they have an issue here. They've set up something or other in the city of Stuart. Well, Chief Tuminelli would do a great job in reviewing that and find something, but he can't go beyond the borders.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So now all of a sudden there's something else happening in St. Lucie County that's related to it, but he can't necessarily arrest somebody in St. Lucie County because of that. Or there's something happening that's tied to it in Jacksonville. So now Duval County is involved, and the only way to handle it really is then to have FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which is the overall with Florida Highway Patrol. They're in the ultimate investigatory side to it. then we also pull in FBI because inevitably this
cross
trafficker
state.
is now going across the state. So with all those levels of law enforcement, there's also a bit of competition between law enforcement as well. Everybody wants the good bust. There's the agents are few and far between that are just purely, hey, I want to get this person, I want to go after this, and it's unfortunate, but that's that's kind of human nature. This is my case. I've got this, and it's hard to give up on that. I see that with legislature as well.
So that seems to be an issue. That seems to be an issue. Is the higher up the chain is preventing potentially busts from happening within the state?
It happens that way, yep. And then
is that something where the state legislature could refine authority?
I wouldn't want to.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to because
it's where you could leverage FBI,
overall,
but you're not limited by.
But overall, I think the cooperation is there and it's good.
Got it.
I think it's not necessarily. I'm probably highlighting a minute side of it.
Yep.
Look, our law enforcement in the state of Florida does an incredible job, and I've worked alongside. There's a chief over in Tampa who said, "Hey, we do these things on a regular basis for human trafficking. Why don't you come along?" I did. It is amazing what they've done to set this up.
Are you privy to the metrics of how arrests or busts or how things are evolving since you guys have been working on this?
We have we see a great amount of arrests and busts. The problem is prosecution because the victims of trafficking so many times will not be a witness against the person who was trafficking them.
Got it.
And they have been mentally damaged. They don't feel safe. We've actually, there are instances where we've taken individuals out of a traffic situation, brought them to an area with other individuals that have been pulled out of a system. They then try to recruit them to go back to that trafficker. They're doing it with the other people that have been pulled out. They're now pulling them back in. And that's how unfortunate, sick that you become so far down into that rabbit hole. And, I don't fault the people that are the victims of this. Would love to find ways to deal with it, but
got it.
We haven't been able to at this point.
Thank you for sharing on that because I was curious,
absolutely.
what the future is and how that's going.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Sincerely.
Yes. We'll catch back up maybe after session. You can kind of let me know. I'll poke you and bug you, and you can let me know what your schedule is like. But thank you again for being available.
Happy to. Hopefully, I'll be able to give you a success story on some PTSD stuff we're doing for the Special Forces guys, and so we'll see from there. But topic for another day. Hey,
thank you.
Great to see you. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.